This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. You have no idea how long it took me to organise those desks. Not the act of actually doing it. The process of commencing the job of organising my desks has been at least 6 months in the making, which is incredibly embarrassing. I think I just got so caught up in just do the work, just get the work done, that I ended up having 2 horrific desks that gave me great anxiety to sit at, when in reality all I needed to do was organise things and not have a stack of books that kept falling off all the time, and not have a load of unused notebooks sitting on the desk when they will be useful in the future. Stop buying notebooks, Cinzia. My God, it's not necessary. Wait until you finish them at least. I thankfully have got the hang of now grabbing and utilising notebooks to their fullest potential and organising my own information system in a way that works with my mindset, but it's taken me far too many years. But anyway, we're going off track. Well, not really. I suppose this whole video is about the idea of rebuilding an intellectual life and what that actually means and how that looks for different people, because it will look different for different people. And I thought it'd be really fun to discuss that topic, some epiphanies that I've had over the recent months, and yeah, just talk it through whilst we're in my research corner of my library. I realise I haven't introduced myself for a very long time, so if you are new to my channel or you have seen me now and then but don't know, hi, my name is Cinzia. I am a part-time self-funded PhD student who works from a distance. So what that means is I have to work to still pay for my PhD. I don't live in the same country as my university, and I do my dissertation and my thesis over an extended period of time. And I'm about to start my 3rd and final year, but it is split into 2 because it's part-time, so I have 2 more years of my final year of my thesis and then 2 more years of write-up. I go into depth about my actual PhD process and my thesis topic and what I'm exploring on my Patreon, so my Patreons know more about that, so I won't tread the same ground here. But I thought it would be really fun to talk about engaging with the intellectual life online and sort of combining these 2 spheres that mean so much to me when I haven't felt like I've been in sync for a very long time. And I think part of that process was rebuilding what it means to have an intellectual life and what an intellectual life looks for me. And I'm using the word intellectual here specifically rather than academic, even though yes, I am academic adjacent. I don't want any discussion of intellect to be catered or cased or bookended by any preconceptions of elitism, because I don't want this to be exclusive to people with certain degrees or people with higher education, because I've never advocated for that. I'm someone who always says you don't need to go to university, you don't need to have a doctorate. It is all down to how people engage with their material and what they learn. If anything, having a doctorate degree for me is purely teaching skills and how I process information, how I write and consume information, and how I position and state an argument. And I really enjoyed utilising the guidance of higher academics, like far more advanced and intelligent academics than myself. That is the benefit of education, and formal education is that guidance, but it isn't necessary for people to be educated or understanding of a subject, and I've always advocated for that. So if you're new here, that's what my position for it is. I hope that I can utilise my experience within academia to help people understand how I can break things down, how they can break things down and learn skills outside of the ivory towers, that is higher institutions that are becoming increasingly more elitist as humanities departments close down and fees go up, debts increase, Jobs are horrible. It's a total mess. I am very fortunate to have been born when I was born, got into education when the fees were much lower than people below me, a year below me, and I would have had to pay 3 times the amount to go to university. And likewise, I'm very fortunate that I spent a decade of my life saving up money in retail jobs to be able to afford my PhD and also pay off my master's debt. So I am someone in a very wonderful position that education was such a tunnel vision for me, but it wasn't because I believed I needed it to become intelligent. It's just I'm a first generation student, and I'm the second person in our family to ever go to university, the first being my cousin, and she also has a doctorate. So it almost felt like, well, if 2 of us are going to go to university, both of us should at least get a doctorate, right? It's ridiculous logic. Don't apply that to yourself. But that's my background and my position on education and learning at your own pace. So when it comes to talking about an intellectual life, this would be me guiding through what I would see as tips and tricks for people who want to engage with anything intellectually, or they aspire to be part of those systems, but for whatever reason may not be able to access them right now at this stage of life, maybe later in life, maybe not. It's not necessary. But what is important is carrying a fascination and love for a subject and how to bring that into your life so naturally that it feels as though you're at a university, even though you're not attending lectures. And what inspired this discussion is the Christopher Nolan discourse over his Odyssey that has taken place over the past few months. At the time I'm filming this, you may be watching this years ahead. It happened a long time ago. It was an absolute mess. And what's terribly funny is that I obviously made my position known, how I felt about the film based on 2 trailers, and people still expected me to go see the film, which is really confusing. I thought I made it quite clear that the film did not appeal to me based on the trailers. And to me, the logical conclusion is if you don't like the look of a trailer, you don't go and look at the film. Obviously, I think you should only have an opinion about something when you have read it, when you have consumed it. So I don't have an opinion on the film, but I still believe like a trailer serves like the blurb of a book. You don't read the book if you're not interested in the book. And you can have an opinion on how you'll feel about it based on the blurb and what it discusses, and that's completely valid, and it's not closed mind to not read a book because it doesn't appeal to you. And in the same way, the trailer was the same for me. Nolan, he's accomplished something I didn't think was possible, which was to get me to feel sick about the Odyssey. Like, I'm absolutely sick to death of it before the film ever came out. And I think it was because of the heightened emotions and discourses around elements of the film that I thought were completely ridiculous, compared to what I found fun to comment on and what I found fun to analyse and look at. And that's just because I find it interesting to note things like Viking ships or armour and dissect things, and that's my fun bit. I'm not particularly interested in the idea that intellectual discourse online has been concentrated into an idea of people winning a debate, and perhaps that is down to a lot of intellectual discussions taking place over the past decade online, particularly regarding things like vaccinations, even things as extreme as flat earth. This idea of scientific discourse combined with ethical and moral discourse has resulted in people believing in rights and wrongs, and then subjecting and importing that onto every sort of discussion, including academic discussion or intellectual adjacent discussion, because these discussions aren't taking place in academia, but they are implying or imposing theoretical and analytical lenses onto cultural discussions, which is always really fun. Like, who does not enjoy watching content like a philosophical look at BBC's Sherlock Holmes? That's fun. Where it becomes quite exhausting is when people think that their analytical perspective is the right way and people who think differently are wrong. That goes against everything that I believe in regarding academia, intellectual discussion. I believe there are many interpretations to things, and it's not about who wins the battle, who is right about a film and who is wrong about the film. We have been joined by a Sappho. There is a tiny sausage dog on my lap. This is Sappho. Yes, I am holding a microphone on a wooden bookmark of the Fellowship of the Ring. Wooden bookmarks are incredibly aesthetically pleasing, but they are terribly impractical. Unless you have a heavy-set book, these just slip out like no one's business. In fact, a lot of bookmarks slip out, really. The only secure ones I find are magnetic ones. Excuse me, I am trying to film. That was my dog Atticus, if you heard him bark. But before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Because whether you are starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it so easy for you to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place and all on your terms. As you know, I've gone through so many iterations of my online sell, from blogging to now running my own business, and Squarespace has seen all sides of that online evolution. As you know, I've talked a lot about the idea of in the future being able to establish my own academic circle, being able to do my own courses and workshops on particular foundations to different texts throughout literature, and I can do all that on my Squarespace website because it allows for me to create members only content for my community, where I can sell access to online courses or blogs or videos or memberships with workshops, and purchases can be anything from a one-time fee to subscription access. And then when it comes to evolving that business, I can make smarter business decisions with Squarespace's intuitive built-in analytics tools, which lets me review my website traffic or learn where to focus my engagement, track revenue from bookings and invoices or product sales, all from one place. So if you're interested, check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you are ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/lady of the library to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Where was I before I was interrupted by a Sappho? Oh yes, I was complaining about Nolan somehow making it possible for me to be sick of the Odyssey. The person who named her first dog after the Odyssey. My first dog is Ithaca. She is this beautiful creature here. Technically, I named her after the poem by Ithaca by Cavafy. So the idea that academic discourse, because it mainly exists online in the form of debate, taints it for me, and has made me feel sort of emotionally exhausted and resentful of it, and that made me question everything about what am I doing. And then thankfully, because I have the access to my PhD and looking at academia from a different lens many hours of each day, it made me realise that actually I have strayed from why I am online the way I am and what I actually love about an intellectual life. And for one reason, whilst it's terribly fun, and fun in small doses, applying academic, philosophical or theoretical and analytical lenses upon cultural commentary, it's fun in small doses, but it's not really what I love the most about everything. What I've always loved the most is literature, and I feel like I have drifted away from that, being pulled by algorithmic conditioning in many ways of what other people are engaging with things, how people are engaging with things, what's been spoken about around me. And because I'm not in an academic setting, because I'm a distance learning, and like many people in this world, I'm not within an academic setting, then my conversations steer around that area. When actually, reality, I love talking about books. I love talking about analysing texts in really obscure ways, whether that's analysing a particular colour in a text, whether that's analysing dinner parties in literature, whether it's analysing depression in literature, or analysing anti-Semitism in literature, how that has evolved, or even the fetishization of people of colour in many texts, because we see that. We see the fetishization of people of colour and commentary on it in texts by George Eliot. We see it in Wuthering Heights, very notably in Wuthering Heights, but also very much notably in the works of George Eliot and also Jane Eyre. We also see commentary on the slave trade within Jane Austen works, and also the Napoleonic Wars, which she was very much engaged with and very much interested in. I have tapped on that very briefly in another video, which I will link here, but if you want me to go into more depth about Jane Austen as a war writer, I am more than happy to, because that is my jam. And I think realising that I had strayed away from the thing that's what inspired me to start my channel, which was discovering more about the texts that I love, or unearthing different layers, a bit like an archaeological excavation of text, rather than just reading a book, but actually taking it apart and analysing scenes and themes within text. that's why I started this. I mean, technically I started because I wanted to do a video on Pottermore, and I did, and I thought it was very funny. And then I was 19 years old and decided I'm about to go to university. Perhaps I should read some of the books that I may be expected to read, like Wuthering Heights and Shakespeare and Oliver Twist. And I read those, and I thought it'd be fun to do tiny little video essays on them, because why not? I had no outlet for it then. And I was really excited to discuss these texts. Sorry, I realised that I've got an Ithaca hair on my nose here and it's tickling my nose, so that's why I keep doing this throughout the video unconsciously. I'm just so used to it. But part of uncovering and rebuilding an intellectual life is one identifying what one loved in the first place, what almost drove someone to the internet in the first place. Because many of us had a reason. I mean, obviously many of us were drawn to the internet because of just wanting to do artwork on it, or wanting to contact people, but many of us have like a teeny tiny curiosity that we like to look up on. And because of how the internet is forming and how the internet is structured, our brains sort of mirror that and start consuming things in that way. And the way I love consuming literature and talking about literature isn't conducive to the algorithm, but at the same time, I'm incredibly excited to go back to it because that's what I have missed the most. I've talked about this extensively over on my Patreon, but I talked about how over the past few months or so, I think it may be 3 or 4 months now, I've been slowly pulling myself offline in many ways. One of the biggest changes that I have found is turning off my devices, like turning off my laptop, turning off my computer, turning off my iPad, and intentionally turning them on when I need to search something. The way I would instinctively sit down at my computer desk and just type in my password, like just automatically, and go, oh wait, the computer's turned off. I don't actually need the computer right now. I just become so ingrained habitually into searching online for what the world is discussing rather than asking myself what I want to discuss and what I'm curious in, and bringing the beauty of that online as a medium, because it's not about rejecting the internet entirely, but actually converting what I want more people to know about, and the things that I think would excite other people, because I'm not the only one. As I found out, I'm not the only person who obsesses over the Muppets in many different ways. The fact that someone else had done a Muppets Odyssey that I had not known about, and you all told me about it, thank you. The internet is a wonderful place for us to find that we are not alone in our strange interests. And in the same way that I love things like Shakespeare, I was obsessed with Shakespeare for so long, and even to this day, I would find myself sort of isolated in that position. I don't know many people who like Shakespeare or love Shakespeare as much as I do, but why aren't I using the internet to showcase that and inspire other people to potentially give Shakespeare a chance? Because oh my god, there is so much just incredible stuff to unearth from that. I think, again, employing the archaeological term here, I'm an archaeologist of literature, and that's what I love more than anything. And I think in my positioning online, or even just being part of a culture, because I'm alone in a room and my only culture is the outside world, which is largely dominated by the internet now. Most people understand one another in terms of the internet. People talk about what's happening on the internet. It's become such an ingrained part of our cultural narrative that I have altered unconsciously how I consumed media or what I should like. And so Shakespeare fell to the wayside because who else would like to talk about in-depth Shakespeare? My understanding of my own interests and passions for, intellectual literary analysis then became reduced to, review books online because people like book reviews, or came reduced to do informative videos about mythology because people want to learn about mythology, which I'm not distancing myself from. I want to clarify myself with that, or a historical event. But the simplicity of their packaging made me feel almost constrained by them. Sorry, you can tell I'm not scripted, can't you? I'm trying something new. Please bear with me. But in constraining and simplifying the things that I love, I started to dislike them because it wasn't what I loved them for. I don't want to just review a text. I don't want to talk about just how I enjoyed it or how I didn't enjoy it. I want to pull apart a text and revisit a text over and over and over again. I would love to do a whole year series on James Joyce's Ulysses, and I know I did say that I'm sick of the Odyssey. Maybe that needs to be something I do in a year's time, when I'm ready to go back with the Odyssey. But I'm a huge fan of dissecting James Joyce's Ulysses. I'm a huge fan of modernist and postmodernist literature. I find it fascinating to dissect. At the moment with my own thesis, I'm specialising a lot in modernist writers right now, so that's probably quite close to the top of my head, but at the same time also looking at Plato, looking at ancient plays, and not just explaining them, but really digging into how these plays have reverberated through literature throughout centuries, because that's my speciality. That's what I love doing. I love talking about classical reception within contemporary or even older literature, and also just looking at literature in general. I miss Chaucer so much. I miss talking about Chaucer and reading about Chaucer and spending my days just spending time with a ridiculous text that has no meaning to the outside world, but maybe it does. Maybe enthusiasm for these texts is what keeps them alive, and I have not allowed myself to live that kind of intellectual life because of internalized messaging of potentially capitalism. Like, is that a good use of your time? Can you really talk about that? Is it worth reading that for the sake of reading it? Yes it is. And everyone, regardless of whether you're a literature person or you're a history person, maybe you specialise in Tudor period, maybe you specialise in costume, like historical costume and design, maybe you're someone who's interested in art history, those elements of us have been washed away by what fits into this medium that most of us consume in our cultural narrative, which is digital spaces. And that has weakened a lot of our passions, I think. Or maybe I'm just speaking a very niche term. But I do love the world offline, when I will use my wonderful, wonderful supervisor here as an understanding, because I've had to introduce her to this whole world of how academic discussions are contorted to fit an internet space, and it's like academia but not. So it's rather like a dumbed down academic space because there isn't the peer review journal, there isn't the always the fact checking taking place either. A lot of it is emotionally driven, or driven by someone wanting to prove a point, or again, like I said earlier, wanting to position themselves as having the right take rather than a take, which is what academia is really about. You know, some people have one position on a text, other people have different versions of the text. How they read it, how they interpret it is completely different. It doesn't make any right or wrong, it just makes other ways of reading. And the way that I think I'm going to sum this up in terms of my incredible, wonderful supervisor, who is Greek, and when I told her about the discourse of the Odyssey online, which she hadn't heard about, she had no idea about any of this, and I mentioned the Helen of Troy casting backlash, and she went, but she's a swan. She comes from a swan egg. It's fictional. Why are they so upset? And I was like, oh, we can talk all about this. It's almost like two different worlds entirely, but it was just so wonderful to see the juxtaposition between what's happening in academic circles and just the bafflement versus what is happening online. And as someone who teeters in both, I'm fascinated by both. I'm not delegitimizing one over the other, but I am saying that what's fascinating about the internet is that it blows up so much and magnifies so much that, but then many narratives on the internet will be first to go, what's the point in academia? Like, why are they talking about the blue curtains? Aren't they making a big deal about nothing? When academics would say the exact same thing about what they get upset about online. And also, if anyone needs me to reiterate this, but I know I get it sometimes, I had this discussion with my partner when we first met, and he was honest. Anyway, I don't really understand the point of literary analysis, because he said, the blue curtains is a prime example. He goes, the curtains are just blue, they don't mean anything. And I was like, they don't mean anything. Most things don't mean anything. But literary analysis isn't about imposing meaning that the author would intend, but rather imposing meaning that you can get from a reading. And if you were looking at the time and space in which something is written, then you can interpret information from that, and then you can also compare it to when it was potentially published or when audiences responded to it, and each element within a text becomes highlighted or even minimized or completely ignored according to when people are reading something. A prime example is when it was published, no one cared about Wilson's Complicated Man opening, but then suddenly when it became a film, 9 years later, and the director referenced her opening line, not even saying that he used her text, just purely that he mentioned Emily Wilson's opening line and that he liked it, then it meant so much more to people, that opening line, because of culture wars, because of the film. It meant nothing when it was published 9 years prior to that conversation happening. And this is what I talk about, like literary analysis, is you can pick up things in a text many years after it has taken place. So you can look at Dickens and you can look at his text that he wrote before Our Mutual Friend, I believe it's called. It is Our Mutual Friend, isn't it? Before that, he wrote a lot of anti-Semitic character tropes into his fiction. And because he was criticised for it, you see him change that with Our Mutual Friend, and he creates the good Jewish character in it, who's a stark contrast to, say, Fagin in Oliver Twist. Now, how do we dissect the intentionality of that? And you look at that historically speaking. But then, many years later, I'm using a very bad example here with Charles Dickens, but certain caricatures get pulled up again, or certain things or events happen at certain periods in the world where these things get drawn up again. And that is why Nietzsche's philosophy in Nazi Germany meant so much to them. But when he was writing it, those intentions did not align or did not apply within that context. Time changes how people interpret text in the same way the Odyssey is reinterpreted for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, which is why Shakespeare talks about like the rape of Philomela with the rape of Lucrece. These things alter over time, and then you can look at snapshots of life. And not only that, but then as we change as a society, we have different understandings of things. We have different understandings of, say, like race theory or gender theory or feminism or men's rights, and we can then look at how these texts would be read again, and looking at how certain symbols can be employed or dissected according to the culture in which they were being read versus the culture in which they were written. And all of that is what makes literature so exciting and literary analysis so exciting, is because it's never the same. Like a text is never the same text all the time. It means different things to different people as the worlds change, as it's translated. So even in a different country, when it is translated, it will mean something different to 10 years after that translation has already existed. And why it was translated at that moment in time, particularly with older texts before the publishing industry became as big as it was, and it is today, when certain texts were published, when certain texts were translated, means something. The fact that, Sappho wasn't translated until the 20th century, these fragments were not discussed until the 20th century, means something in terms of everything, in terms of how we understand classical literature in general, and how literature evolved from there, and how women got involved, and how translations got involved. These are all huge monumental shifts that seem like nothing when you pick up a book like like Ovid's Metamorphosis, and suddenly how the world changes. I mean, the fact that we take the idea of the act of translation for granted says a lot. The idea that a woman hadn't translated the Odyssey into English until 2017 is sort of mind-blowing when you think about the centuries of this text existing, the 2,000 years in which this text has existed, and that's the first woman. And again, we haven't had people of colour translate those texts, and people may think, oh, well, that doesn't mean anything. Well, technically it does, because it's talking a lot about education and access to these texts, and who are being, taught these texts, and access to these ancient languages, but also who gets published. All of this means something. And I know a lot of people, particularly potentially on far extremes of the political party, would argue that people are drawing attention to something that doesn't need to be drawn attention to. But in reality, these things are significant, not for a social justice thing. The social justice starts about ethics and where we are, but it does mean something. It means a lot that people in positions of privilege can take for granted, and they don't want it to mean anything because people of their position can already have done that for centuries. But it does mean something, and it does change how people engage with texts and how they perceive texts. And again, backgrounds will alter how people, what they read into it, what language they employ. And that isn't the destruction of anything. It's just the evolution of how texts exists in this world, which is what makes literature so exciting and what I love about it. And we see that more prominently in texts like Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is as it is, but how it is presented and how it is, you know, where you position the play, if you're positioning it in a different country, if you're just, you know, doing it in a different cast or different language, that transforms it in a way that doesn't destroy it in any shape or form, but shows you how this text can morph with cultures, with people, with time zones. You know, I was in a production of Twelfth Night that was set in Victorian England, and that did change a lot of how the text was perceived. We had to alter what we were referring to without changing the text, but symbolically and visually what we were referring to. Or even say the torture of Malvolio was definitely electrocution therapy that he was going through, which isn't obviously Jacobean methodology of the punishment of Malvolio. But those things have changed. And again, many years later, after Shakespeare Twelfth Night, there was a play called Malvolio's Revenge, and that's because sympathies lay with Malvolio decades after, and people felt like they wanted to see Malvolio getting revenge because how we viewed Shakespeare changed, and people felt more sympathetic to characters that would have otherwise been demonized by the vast majority of people in the Jacobean period. This is exciting stuff. This is what I love talking about, and it's not about as the derivative, very boring culture war narratives that are just lifeless and dull and people just wanting to prove themselves right. That's not interesting to me. What I love about talking about the evolution of literature and the evolution of how it adapts culturally is because I see it living. I see this text living and taking new forms, and that's exciting. I don't give a toss if it has bastardized the original, because it hasn't bastardized the original. Shakespeare has existed since the first folio, and it carries on. And people still watch traditional Shakespeare productions, and then people still watch new adaptive ones. One of the greatest productions I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, one was a ballet, but one was an opera, and it was The Trojan Women in Korean, and it came to the Edinburgh Fringe, I think 2 years ago. If you get to see this production, see it. It is all in Korean, it is all operatic, and I think it is still the closest I will ever get to experiencing an ancient Greek play in its fullest ferocity, because I have never seen such emotion on stage. These women were screaming. It was so visceral. And I'm reading a translation above. It was absolutely life-changing, that production, and seeing an ancient Greek play translated into Korean and acted by Korean women. I think the closest I will ever get to experiencing an ancient Greek production, because it was just out of this world. Emotively, they really captured what I imagined this play to have been, and I could see the role that, you know, Korean culture played in their styling and how they positioned things, in how they presented their characters, and yet it was so authentic. How did I get into this? This is why I should script, really, isn't it? This is really why I should be scripting. Let me go back to the idea of creating an intellectual life for oneself, because, hi, tangent. What I've studied for myself is really prioritizing engaging with the things that I love, again, outside the algorithm. Engaging with text, again, from either a new perspective or from a seasoned appreciator and lover of certain texts, and re-engaging and pulling things out that I love. And I want to do that online. And I want to encourage other people to do it in their spare time too. So I said already that I want to do James Joyce's Ulysses as like a year-long project in the future. I know I shouldn't be having long projects alongside my PhD, but honestly I think it's the only thing that keeps me going, is having long projects alongside my PhD. And I think one of the first ones I want to do is Marcel Proust, because I have never read his work. I want to go through all his texts because, again, I have friends who said this text changed their lives, and I want to experience that for myself and go through very slowly A Swan's Way, whilst also revisiting things that I love. And I really adore classical reception within text, which is looking at the role of ancient texts within other more, I say contemporary, but do we consider James Joyce is more contemporary than, I suppose, Chaucer? But I love looking at the employment of the ancient world within English literature, we'll just say. And I want to write about that more. I want to talk about that more. I want to talk about strange, obscure themes throughout Shakespeare plays that I find fascinating that other people may not care about. I want to talk about extreme, weird themes that I saw when reading David Copperfield for a second time that I don't think anyone else is really interested in. I really want to talk about it anyway, and I want to engage my brain with enthusiasm and with the things that it's sincerely interested in, and help shape an internet that isn't just I don't want to say it in a negative, because I'm not looking down or dismissing the legitimacy of analytical lenses on cultural commentary, because I love that stuff. I love consuming it. So I'm not demonizing that in any way, but I want to engage with my brain, and I really want to revisit the Canterbury Tales. I really want to go back to looking at Jane Eyre. I really want to go back to looking at Jane Austen as a war writer again, because she's fantastic. I really want to start reading Dostoevsky and actually experiencing that for the first time, whilst also just dissecting and writing about it. This is probably the terrible place to put this thing. I'll pop it in the top comment in the video below, but I was going to ask for a poll because I have got a newsletter. But I'm hyper aware that some people have told me that they don't get the newsletter. Some people have told me that they just delete their inbox because it becomes overwhelming. And I was thinking if I should do my newsletter along with a Substack, if people would be interested in a Substack. But I left Substack because of the ethical dubiousness of the creator and what it allows to be monetized on there. Are we applying a lens to Substack that is really not exclusive to Substack? Because surely there are dubious things that get monetized on other social media platforms, whether that's Instagram or Twitter or Blue Sky or YouTube. I'm not sure. I've always been against Substack because of the ethics of what it allows to be monetized on there. But is that unique to Substack is what I should really be asking, and are people still not using the platform? Because I really loved the idea of Substack. I love talking about texts and analysing those texts. But I'm also someone who has an overwhelming inbox, and I think I'd rather have a platform where I read newsletters rather than accidentally delete them, and I think a lot of mine are being deleted or getting into junk mail. So please let me know. I'll have a poll about Substack. But yeah, that's what I don't know if that helped. I'm not sure if I did a very good job of talking about regaining one's intellectual life. But I hope I gave an insight into if you can think of it within your own terms, thinking about what is an intellectual life to you, and then how would you start actually engaging with that intellectual life. And it's not talking about doing courses. You don't have to pay any money, maybe to buy some books, but you don't have to pay any money for it. And ask yourself actually what you're rebuilding. And it's not about demonizing things that are other, but actually what do you want to build on top of potentially what exists, and what you want to remove in order for that intellectual life to flourish. And that may be even getting rid of apps on your phone and downloading apps about your chosen topic. Would you rather actually buy a subscription for that than scroll on Instagram for hours and hours? And then would you rather have an outlet that you would engage with? And it doesn't matter if no one reads it. It doesn't matter if it's a Substack that has like 10 subscribers. It doesn't matter if it's just a newsletter between you and your friends. Would you get joy out of that? Would a website, having your own little website, your blog, where you talk about it? Doesn't matter if there's no footfall, but you're engaging with yourself in an intellectual way and stimulating your brain in that way, and treating yourself like an academic, writing about things that you love, and attending conferences that you can attend for free. A lot of conferences take place online, and you can just watch people deliver their papers, and maybe even apply for a conference yourself. If you want any guidance on things like that and becoming an independent scholar, please let me know. I'm really happy to do a video on that. But also, I want to get into some literary analysis, including ancient texts, because I'm not excluding ancient texts. They are a big part of my life. So please don't worry if you're someone who likes the ancient text discussions. I will be getting into those. But I thank you. I hope you don't mind that this is my new sort of setup. I think I had a bit of a a sad moment with the internet the past month or so. It made me really down and thought, what am I doing? This isn't how I was here. This wasn't why I was here. Thank you as always for your wonderful support and your kind messages and comments. I do read as many as I possibly can. And thank you as always to my Patreons for making this possible, and particularly my top tier Patrons, who I have written down because we're not doing a script online on the screen anymore. So we have Eric Taylor, Yvonne and Yvonne, Jenny Edivane, Wee Lauren, Gil the Gilded Dragon, Lady of the Labyrinth, That Darn Cat, Nicholas Reed, Andy Bazil, Joshua Heredia, Holly is Autistic. Thank you as always, and I hope you are happy and healthy. And remember, books save lives. So keep reading.